Velma Barfield wasn't your typical serial killer. She was a grandmother with a Bible in one hand and poison in the other. In her final 24 hours, she found peace, but justice was unstoppable. How did she spend her last moments? This is her death row story. The night of October 31st, 1984, hung thick with a sense of finality at North Carolina's Central Prison. The steel bars and concrete walls, usually indifferent to the passage of time, now seemed to hold their breath. In a small cell on death row, Velma Barfield lay still on her cot, her hands tucked beneath her head, her breathing slow and even. Sleep had finally claimed her, as if offering one last mercy before the dawn of her final day. A lone guard, stationed just outside her cell, shifted his weight and cleared his throat, breaking the hush. "You okay?" he asked softly, not expecting much of a response. Velma stirred slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." She rolled onto her side, her breathing steady once more, as though tomorrow weren't creeping closer with every tick of the clock. If one were to glance at her now, she might appear to be any other grandmother, soft-spoken, her features weathered by time, her demeanor gentle. But the truth was far darker than the image she presented. Velma Barfield was no ordinary woman. She was a murderer. Born in 1932 in rural South Carolina, Velma's early life was nothing extraordinary. She married, had children, and played the role of a devoted wife and mother. But somewhere along the way, something inside her twisted. Her first husband, Thomas Burke, died in a mysterious house fire. A tragic accident, they said. No one suspected otherwise. Years passed, and Velma remarried, only for her second husband, Jennings Barfield, to fall violently ill and die, arsenic poisoning, though at the time, no one thought to question it. Then came her mother, Lillian. Velma cared for her, doted on her, and then poisoned her twice. The second time was fatal. The deaths continued, each masked by Velma's seemingly kind and nurturing nature. She took on work as a caregiver, tending to the elderly, gaining their trust, and ultimately sealing their fate. 3 of her patients fell victim to her lethal touch. Yet, it wasn't until 1978, when her fiancé, Stuart Taylor, collapsed from drinking arsenic-laced beer, that the facade crumbled. An investigation unraveled the grim pattern, exposing Velma's dark secrets one by one. And so, on this November morning, she sat on the precipice of justice. At just past 6, she stirred, coughing lightly before sitting up. "I really slept well," she said to the guard, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Must have been because I barely slept the night before." A quiet chuckle followed, almost as if she found the irony amusing. She wrapped her hands around a cup of instant coffee, the warmth seeping into her fingers. Her Bible lay beside her, its pages worn from years of searching for salvation within its words. On death row, she had embraced faith, becoming a born-again Christian. She ministered to fellow inmates, shared scripture with guards, and pleaded for clemency on the grounds of her transformation. Governor Jim Hunt listened, but remained unmoved. Redemption, no matter how profound, could not erase the lives she had stolen. As the day unfolded, Velma remained calm, her actions methodical. She removed her hair rollers, smoothing her graying curls, ensuring she faced her final hours with dignity. At precisely 9 a.m., her visitors began to arrive. Family, spiritual advisors, and those who had grown to care for her in her final years. Guards flanked her as she moved through the halls, their faces unreadable. Near the inmate elevator, a correctional officer approached, extending a single flower toward her. She paused, her fingers brushing over the delicate petals. For a brief moment, there was something almost poetic in the gesture, one fleeting sign of beauty in a day marked by death. By nightfall, the syringes were ready, the execution chamber prepared. The first woman to be executed in the United States in over 2 decades was about to meet her end. And yet, Velma Barfield, who had spent her life deceiving, poisoning, and hiding behind a mask of kindness, remained composed. Perhaps, in her final moments, she had finally made peace with the inevitable. The correctional officer stepped forward, his hands cradling a single, bright yellow mum from the prison chapel. "Mrs. Barfield," he said softly, offering the flower. It was a small but heartfelt token from the men of Central Prison, a final gesture of compassion. The guards hesitated, unsure whether she should accept it, but when Velma reached out, they did not stop her. She held it carefully, her fingers brushing over the petals. "Thank them for me," she said, her voice steady. Just after 11:30, Velma sat in the visitor room, anticipation lighting her face. There was a visit she had been looking forward to for months. When her pastor arrived, his first time seeing her since Christmas, she rose to greet him, her smile warm and radiant. Later, he would recall the striking contrast between her joy and the somber reality of the day. It was as if, for a brief moment, she had detached herself from the weight of what was to come. But he had not come only to share in her happiness. He carried devastating news. Taking her hand, he spoke gently. "Velma, I just heard your last appeal was turned down." She looked away briefly, as if absorbing the finality of his words. When she turned back, her gaze was unshaken. "Well, that's what I figured," she said softly. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Is there anything at all that's left unconfessed?" "No, brother. I'm ready to go." Lunch was simple: pea soup with crackers and a cup of fruit punch. She ate quietly, flipping through a fresh stack of mail and telegrams. Notes of support, prayers, farewells. She appreciated them all, but remained focused. "Don't worry about me," she told the chaplains who sat with her. "Focus on the others, the 39 men still here on death row." She knew their pain, their burdens. In a few hours, she would leave this world, but they would remain trapped in limbo between hope and despair. The afternoon hours slipped away in a steady stream of visitors. Her brother Jimmy, her cousin John, they all came to see her one last time. The final 2 hours were reserved for Ronnie and Pam. Unlike the others, their time was not limited to a brief 30-minute farewell. When Pam entered the room, she ran straight into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Ronnie stood nearby, struggling with the words he couldn't find. Velma, calm despite the inevitable, focused not on herself, but on them. She gave Ronnie final instructions: to take care of Pam, to handle the funeral, to remember the good times. Her voice was soft but firm, her last wishes clear. At 7:15 p.m., the guards arrived. Her wrists were secured in handcuffs, the cold metal biting against her skin. Outside her cell, her 2 lawyers stood waiting, each holding a single rose. Their smiles were strained, feeble attempts at comfort in a moment where words failed. For over an hour, the 3 of them sat together in a farewell thick with emotion. Velma had agreed to the final appeals, not for herself but for them, because she knew how much it meant to them to keep trying. The court's repeated refusals had been crushing, particularly for Richard Burr. She wasn't just another case to him, she was his first, the one he saw through to the end. Years later, he would recall those final moments with raw honesty. "I had a terrible sense of failure. I was crying, telling her how sorry I was. It wasn't about legal arguments anymore. It was about human connection, about knowing this was goodbye." Just as Velma set down her pen, stacking her letters neatly for the mailroom, a guard appeared at her cell door. "Are you ready to see the chaplain?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "Anytime," she said, her voice steady. At 11:30 p.m., Chaplain Phil Carter stepped into the cell, nervous in a way he wasn't used to. What if he failed her in her final hours? But within moments, his fear melted away. Velma spoke not of herself, not of fear, nor regret for her fate. She spoke only of others, her children, her family, her lawyers, the warden, even the people preparing to take her life. That was all that occupied her thoughts. By 1:45 a.m., November 2nd, 1984, the moment had come. Dressed in soft pink pajamas, Velma's final request was granted, a small dignity amidst the grim preparations. A diaper was added, a practical necessity. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest as the gurney arrived. Guards secured her body, thick straps locking her legs in place. Catheters were inserted into her arms, the saline drip beginning its steady flow. A few minutes before 2 a.m., Velma was wheeled into the execution chamber. Beyond the glass, onlookers stood silent, some seeing justice, others vengeance. 3 syringes were attached to the IV lines, each operated by a different volunteer. One was a dummy, ensuring that none would ever know if they had delivered the fatal dose. When asked if she had any final words, Velma's voice remained calm. "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry. I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." At precisely 2:15 a.m., the warden gave the signal. The process was smooth, clinical, and unyielding. 10 minutes later, Velma Barfield was pronounced dead. Her body was wheeled away past crowds of demonstrators on both sides of the capital punishment debate. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.